Welcome to the Self-Care Sound Mind podcast. In this space, we're going to talk about the losses we don't always have the language for. Because grief isn't only about losing someone we love. Sometimes it's the end of a relationship, a friendship that's faded, a dream that's changed, or the life we thought we'd have. In this series, we're naming all kinds of grief that often go unseen, and we're going to learn how to move through them with compassion. On tonight's episode, we're going to talk about ambiguous loss, grieving the pain of no closure, and living with unanswered questions and ambiguous loss. On tonight's episode, we're going to have my friend Jordyn Chandler, LPCMH, and owner of JLC Wellness Center. Tag a friend, share the post, let everyone know that the Self-Care Sound Mind podcast is live. You don't want to miss this episode. Welcome everyone to the Self-Care Sound Mind podcast. I am Kiera Moore with Kiera Moore Therapeutic Services, and I am so excited about episode 4, season 3, episode 4 of the Self-Care Sound Mind podcast. And in this season, we are talking about grief, but not just grief in terms of death. We are talking about the griefs that we carry that most people don't mention, don't have language for, or just don't talk about. It could be losing a dream, a relationship, or the version of your life you thought you would have, or even your expectations of yourself. This season, we are not just going to talk about it, but we're going to also learn how to deal with this type of loss and help each other with compassion. So tonight's episode is so important and it's so exciting. We're talking about ambiguous loss. The loss of not getting closure, living with unanswered questions, apologies that you deserve that you may or may not ever get. We are talking about ambiguous loss, and we are going to have this conversation talking about estrangement, unresolved relationships, emotional absence, and we're going to have this conversation with my friend Jordyn Chandler from JLC Wellness Center. Hi, Jordyn.
Kiera.
I'm so excited. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm also very excited to be here. I'm so impressed with just
thank you. Yeah. So tell us about yourself, who you are, what you do, and who do you serve? Who do you help?
Yes. So like many of us, I am a solo practitioner that went out on my own once the pandemic hit, and I just saw an opportunity to bet on myself.
Yes.
Take a risk, go for it. So I have a small private practice here in Kent County where I serve children, adults, so more like teenagers. So 13 and above, and then adults, a little bit of an aging population too that I see. So anything from depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and a little bit of everything in between.
Okay, well, that will definitely come in handy when we dive deeper into this topic, the pain of no closure.
Yes.
As you know, I do a lot of grief work, and most of the time we only give space to grief when it comes to death. We also do a lot when it comes to like the end of a romantic relationship.
Yes.
In episode 2, we talked about the loss of friendships and relationships, but there's so many times when I'm in session and I have to point out to somebody that what they're feeling in that moment is grief.
Yes.
They don't even realize that.
Not a consideration.
Yes, they have no idea. It's like they're trying to explain it. And I'm thinking to myself, honey, you are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Grieving the loss of what was, or you're grieving the loss of what you expected, or you're grieving the loss of the fact that you had this plan and it didn't work out. And so when we think about ambiguous loss, right, it's I mean, obviously it's in the name, right? But there's no clear ending, there's no explanation.
Right.
In some cases, you may just be ghosted, right? And there ain't nothing like being ghosted. It is just like it leaves you like craving and wanting answers.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, there are just some times when we just don't get the answer. And
Right.
then we are left to pick up the pieces of what that does to us emotionally. So, what can you share about ambiguous loss, or what have you seen in some of your clients?
Yeah, this really resonates with me quite heavily
And
because,
feel free to talk from a personal level too. I forgot to
yes,
share that. Mhm.
okay, of course. Um, yeah, so I guess on many levels, on a personal level, I can think of a relationship with a family member that I've had for my entire life. Um, Relatively close in age too, but a just a difference in opinion
Mm.
has resulted in no contact,
Mm.
um, not by my choice. So, um, in addition to, I guess, my own experience with that, I've noticed that no contact is something that's also happening with my client population,
Mm.
and in particular, a very specific client
Mhm.
population.
I was going to say, talk a little bit before you go deeper into the example. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about this idea of going no contact, because I'm seeing it so much. Okay, so my guilty pleasure is this like, am I the a-hole scenarios, like the Reddit posts on social media
Yeah.
where they're talking about the different conflicts and things like that. Um, and almost immediately the responses are like, you need to go no contact, you need to go no contact, and there's never really resolution. Now don't get me wrong, in my life I've been a quick to cut off type of person.
Okay.
However, I understand with maturity and age and growth and healing that in the time that I might need to process what I feel, and in that reflection, cutting people off, going no contact is not always the healthiest solution,
No, it's not
but
always.
it is a trend that we are seeing. So, talk a little bit about this idea of going no contact.
Yeah, so I like the word that you use, trend,
Mhm.
because I think when we have thought about the idea of no contact, not speaking to anyone, not having any physical communication or interaction, not having any verbal communication of any sorts, not putting yourself in a space to be around
Yeah.
um, that person, it was very much seen like, you get over things, you let it go, let bygones be bygones, that's your
Mhm.
family, you only have one, whatever, fill in the
Yeah.
blank. But now what's kind of trendy, what's being popularized is this idea that we have agency and we have choice. And if someone
Mhm.
is causing you emotional harm, obviously physical harm, but emotional harm, that you have an option
Mhm.
to remove that person from your sphere.
Yeah.
And people are using that option and they're going for it, regardless of how close they are to that person, the
Mhm.
length of the relationship span. And it's a choice that people are making for themselves.
And don't get me wrong, there are scenarios like I'm never going to be one to just say just deal with the
Yeah.
abuse, or you know what I mean? So there are certainly situations where going no contact is the best thing for the emotional, physical health and safety of a person. But in other scenarios, right, we're going no contact after conflict, after a difference of opinion,
Right.
after, finding out who you voted for, or like, we're going no contact for reasons that may not really require no, not boundary,
Mhm.
sure, no contact, maybe not every time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I think you're right. Some people are utilizing this trend as an opportunity to avoid, as an
Yeah,
opportunity to.
avoid healthy communication, avoid
Mhm,
responsibility.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Just avoid a hard conversation.
Mm,
avoid hearing that they're wrong, that they made a mistake. It's just, I'd rather no contact, out of sight, out of mind, moving on from
mhm.
it.
Have
Um,
you noticed that maybe some of the people who are initiating the no contact are actually um, the initiator of the conflict?
I would think
Or
I would think so. In the more unhealthy cases, in the more
mm,
it's just trivial, I don't want to deal with it. Yes, I think so. I think those are people who are particularly not skilled with dealing with conflict resolution in
yeah,
the unhealthy ways, but in the ways in which someone is being emotionally or physically harmed, I think it's often, when I'm noticing, a last resort. Like, they've
yeah,
tried, they've done the counseling, they've journaled, they've talked, they've pleaded in some cases,
mhm.
and now they're like, this is the healthiest thing for me.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
in those cases, right, I totally understand like that you've tried to do the work because in relationships it takes both people
Yes.
or all parties involved to do the work and to put in the effort. Which leads us to the next point. Like sometimes this ambiguous loss can be estranged family members or friends. It can be, the loss with an addiction, right? Or an illness like dementia, missing that closure in a relationship. Like I can think within my own family, how difficult it is to process the fact that addiction is basically the addiction, right? It feels like
Mhm.
it's the choice between the addiction and the person. And in my familial cases, it's in like the family, the children, like you're choosing this over the children. I understand, the addiction is a little bit more than a choice, right?
Right. It's disease. Yeah.
It's an illness. It's, I get all of that.
Mhm.
Um, but to the person, it feels like the effort to overcome the illness
Mhm.
is not there, and in turn that is more important than me, right? And so you might see in cases uh that absence, like I know my mother, father, whomever is there, but they're not there, and it feels like they're choosing to not be there. So how do we manage knowing that someone is close enough?
Mhm.
They're close enough to be involved. They're close enough to operate in the role they're supposed to in my life, but they're not. That's heavy.
It's very heavy.
And children are experiencing this. People are experiencing in general, but I think about, my experience in the school where children are feeling these types of feelings every day and they're still being expected to, pass their math tests when they're waking up trying to figure out where their parent is and why they're not around. Those things are way too heavy for, some of these things that these kids are carrying. What have you seen when it comes to like estrangement with families or like some of these feelings of,
Mhm. Yeah. I want to make a one point too that you said is really important, just with how we expect kids to perform
mm,
despite whatever's happening at home. And I think we do a better job with elementary school kids. How are
mm,
you feeling today? Like the feelings chart, identifying it, checking in. But for
mhm.
whatever reason, we decide that
Stops after elementary. Yeah.
yeah, that like you should have all these skills, that you should be able to communicate. And by the time you're middle school, high school, that you should have already gained all the skills to just manage. And we stop asking, we stop checking in, we stop
That's so
noticing, we stop, everything just changes. And
That's so true, and the reality is there's a whole lot of adults who don't have the emotional regulation skills to manage some of these heavy experiences, but we expect children to.
yeah.
And when it comes to loss in general, like I say it all the time, we get bereavement days.
Hmm.
Children are expected to show up, go to school like nothing is wrong. And the parents, I get it. You do things because you think you're doing the right thing. You think you're helping, but it's like, well, I just thought that them coming to school and just feeling like a normal day would would be better for them. And I'm like, how is this normal? They
Right.
just lost a loved one and you're expecting them to show up and perform at school.
Right. Right.
That's not normal.
Not at all. Not at all. It's not an escape. It's not a distraction. I think some people may think that, but if it's heavy enough, it's on your mind regardless of the environment.
And then they'll end up in guidance crying all day, and end up having to be picked up because you're just not able to function like normal when you are experiencing such high levels of pain. And it's so interesting that grief gets overlooked because it's a part of everyone's experience, whether you realize it or not, right? And so these intense levels of pain, they show up, and sometimes they will sneak attack you. You could be having a good day and a smell, right? One time I opened a new lip gloss one day and I was so triggered by the smell of this lip gloss because it reminded me of my childhood. It reminded me of my godmother and her Avon days and all the fruity chapsticks I used to get as a kid. You know what I mean? And that messed me up. Okay.
For you back in the time. Yeah.
Right. I was flooded with memories. I was flooded with emotion. I was flooded with pain. And then still had to show up and perform.
Right. It's really unrealistic, but I mean, we do it. It's
right. But as a trained professional, if it's difficult for me to do, I can't imagine a middle schooler having to process through all of that, but we're expected to. And it, like you said, it's completely unrealistic.
It is. And it's unrealistic. It's ineffective. It's not working.
And we wonder why they're so dysregulated.
Yeah, I'm glad we're bringing attention to it and we can start to work towards solutions and changing norms.
Absolutely. Ambiguous loss is one of those things that is so painful because there's no end, right? And you don't ever, and this is something I'm trying to make everyone understand. You don't get over loss. You process through it, right? And so even using death as an example, you have to adjust to your new reality, your new normal. And that takes a lot of time. That first year of loss, when you experience, special days like holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, that first year is horrible. The second year might be, equally as painful or maybe a little bit less intense. And if you are managing your grief and processing through it in a healthy way and in a healthy environment, the intensity of the pain changes, but you still feel the pain, right? This year made 10 years since my brother died. Do I still feel the sting of that loss? Of course I do. Does it affect me the same way? On some days it does. But for the majority of it, the pain has changed. The intensity of the pain has changed. But at the same time, and we talked about this a lot in our last episode, proximity has a lot to do with our experience. So because the physical loss of a person, your brain adjusts to they're no longer in your proximity.
Yes.
But what about the people who might still be in somewhat of proximity, but the infraction in the relationship or whatever caused that ambiguous loss to happen, it's like, I still see this person every now and then.
Right.
I know that this person might still be living and not taking care of their responsibility, or the loss of, I think about single parents, right? The grief of, not expecting yourself to, take care of and raise a child on your own, knowing that the person you made the child with is just off skipping and living life, right? That's a reminder of loss on a daily basis. So like I that proximity, our brain doesn't adjust to that because it doesn't take place here. Like,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Our brains try, and we're always trying to look for meaning and to put our experiences into words. To find language for the pain that we experience really brings healing. So when we can't identify, if we can't find the meaning, then we can't create the language for it.
we can't make
Um,
sense of it.
we can't make sense of it. Yes, we cannot
And
make
there's
sense of it.
so much loss that doesn't make sense.
There's so much loss that doesn't make sense. There's so much loss that seems unnecessary. Uh,
Yes.
that could have been resolved with a simple conversation.
Mhm.
And so we're left just dealing with the reality of the way that things are.
And you know what? I know we talked a little bit before we started, but I'm thinking about other situations, like with crime, right? Where like involuntary manslaughter kind of things, where it's like these people didn't intend to harm, but
Mhm.
they did.
Yeah.
So there now it's like this, there's no closure for, if someone did die because they were hit by a drunk driver, or if someone, had a medical emergency and it resulted in the loss of another person's life, or like there's so many things and so many cases where it's like, why did this have to happen? And
Yeah.
and I feel like that's one of the questions that we ask ourselves with ambiguous loss is the why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think um, that's such an important part too, like the unintentional piece of
Mm,
this that can happen because what do you do? Like how do you sit with that, especially if you are the person who caused the harm
mhm,
unintentionally? Like how do you view yourself? How do you sit with the fact that you've now forever,
mhm.
I don't know, I was going to say indirectly, but I guess directly, your actions then hurt someone
Yes.
else and then hurt a family and change the trajectory of their life. Like what do you do?
It's definitely hard, and working with people um who have been on that end of this situation, it's not easy to overcome.
Mm-mm.
And for I've seen where some people are doing the best they can to forgive themselves, and to try to make better choices and be a better individual. And then I've seen it where the guilt has created an even more harmful emotional environment for that person, where it's hard to forgive themselves. And so that's loss, that ambiguous loss on both ends, right?
Yeah.
um the lack of closure. A lot of people, and it's real, completely real, so real, when relationships end, and it's like, why? We talked a little bit about like being ghosted, right? Like you thought things were going well, next thing you know, the person is just like gone, like
Mhm.
no explanation. You just completely ghosted me. And
Completely
I'm
good.
feeling like, did
Right.
something happen? Again, we go back to why.
Sometimes
An-
things are going well, at least from the other person's point of view, and then they're really confused.
yeah,
Yeah,
an-
it was a good time.
another why that just doesn't seem like it's going to be answered.
Mhm.
But I also think about when it comes to like, how can I describe it? So even like in medical cases, right? So like we talked a little bit about the why when it comes to like, why did this have to happen? Like seeing someone um decline with their health. And we'll get into this a little bit later in another episode, but like watching someone's health decline, whether it's dementia or in some cases cancer or other chronic illnesses. That's another thing where you're kind of like, your brain is trying to catch up to your experience. And it's it's a anticipatory loss, Like, you feel the loss in this moment. You feel the grief in this moment because you can see what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Do you see their proximity dwindling? Is that
Yes.
part of it? Yeah.
And then it's almost like the clock starts all over once it actually, happens. Like, there's so many, when I think about this ambiguous loss, the unresolved, that unresolved feeling, like not getting an answer, not understanding, not being able to make sense of it. Not only does the brain struggle with that uncertainty, the people around us, society, our community, they don't seem to get that part of loss.
They don't. They don't. They don't. And sometimes they will, sometimes they have the worst things to say. Like sometimes they can be re-triggering. They can put us back into a space of, you're working on your healing, you're working on just acceptance, and then that person says something that brings you right back.
When I tell you the amount of unhelpful, harmful, and ineffective statements that I hear, I'm like, they said what? And you know that there's no intentional harm, but it goes back to that, like, you involuntarily just threw salt in my wound, right?
Yeah.
There's that ambiguous pain. I feel like it's even more invisible than some of these other losses that we have been talking about on this episode or on this series, because no one sees it. Right? Like, this is even more invisible. There's no rituals, there's no social support, it's an individual pain that requires individual healing. Unless you have the language to express the help that you need, and be able to say, hey, I need this from you. It's like one of those things where, like, you didn't cause the pain,
right?
But you are responsible to heal through it.
Yeah, you didn't cause the pain. You're unfortunately inconvenienced. You have to wrestle with all these emotions. But yeah, it's your responsibility to get well, to recover,
Yes.
to then maybe, impart, be an example of how you continue to move forward in spite of
that part, in spite of what happened, right? Like, you're not responsible for what happened to you, but you are responsible for how you heal. You're responsible for how you allow it to affect you. And I don't mean the immediate response, because your immediate response to an event is what your body, your brain, that's what it needed. That's how it needed to respond, right? But eventually, you have to decide, how does this affect me? Yes. How does this control me? How much time does it take from me? And that's where the responsibility comes in for healing, which is not easy to do, because we do have to fight through things like accepting that this is our reality. And the acceptance of ambiguous loss, I feel like it's like one of the first things we have to do, but it's so hard.
It is hard.
How can I accept that you did that to me? How can I accept that you ghosted me? How can I accept that you harmed me in this way? I'm not going to get an apology. I think about survivors of sexual abuse, right?
Yeah.
There's never an apology.
Ever.
There is never, I shouldn't say never. There's never an apology, and there's seldom justice.
And there's rarely an acknowledgement that it happened,
Once again, you're bearing the full burden. You're taking on all the loss. There's no, in many cases, no justice. I keep seeing these headlines about this person with this high position who got a slap on the wrist, some lawyer or politician got a slap on the wrist for sexually abusing a 3-year-old. And this child is going to be dealing with the impact of this abuse for the rest of their life.
Forever, yeah.
While this person gets to go on and live his life, right?
Right.
That's such an unfair loss that this child now has to pick up the pieces and figure life out through this lens. There's no apology and there's no justice. But to have a healthy life, they're going to need support throughout their childhood, but then also take back the reins and the power of their life to have the life that they deserve.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, it's the only way.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, so when we talk about like the emotional response or like patterns to manage through, we definitely have to decide between like hope and acceptance, right? Sometimes ambiguous loss can continue because of the hope that we have. I think about clients, family, people I know who've held out hope thinking that a person would change, that they would make the right choices. Sometimes that hope was fruitful, and sometimes the hope was a false hope that never manifested into change.
Yeah. I mean, I come across a lot of adult clients who are waiting for the moment for their parents to change, for, the moment that they get the apology for what was done to them when they were kids, for how they handle discipline, for how the game that they missed. They want that recognition, and they can't really wrestle with the fact that now they have children of their own and how present they are in their children's lives, and they are wrestling with the fact of how could, my mom, my dad not be there for me, punish me in this way when I couldn't imagine doing this to a child of my own. And they just wrestle with, how it was even possible.
How do you as a clinician help between the hope and the acceptance?
So I'm very much someone, I'm very much a clinician that I pride my clients in the importance of hope, the importance of thinking positively, of, knowing that anything is possible. However, I do my due diligence to make sure that we also focus on what's present in front of us. And if we look at what's present, if we look at the circumstances, the relationships that we have in front of us, based on the patterns, based off of the skills that we have, how likely is this to happen within this frame? Like, I like to use measurable goals. So maybe this will have, but let's focus on, this time frame now. And in this time frame, is this likely? And if the answer is no, then maybe we need to focus more on this aspect. We can still have hope, but let's narrow and kind of focus on our present right now. And if it's not likely, then we probably don't need to put the energy into it. We probably don't need to, dive this deep into it. But if we see change, if we see growth, maybe we can put a little more energy into that, but very much trying to look at what's present in front of us. And then we can aspire, we can have hope, but let's make it a realistic vision rather than.
I love how you broke that down, because a lot of times our hope is based on a romanticized version of our life and reality, right? It's the best case scenario, which is great, but the reality is, while that can happen, it also, there's a possibility that it may not, right? And going based on what is happening, the reality of the moment, and not so much a false hope, but hope with a little bit of realism in there, allowing the person to see what's in their control and what's not. And I think that's important too. And then once that acceptance, or the hope and acceptance, kind of intertwine to a realistic goal, how do you or have you come across a client where they start to feel guilty about no longer needing, like once we start moving through that ambiguous loss, the guilt of moving forward sometimes, whether it's, they've gone no contact with a family member because that was the most reasonable choice, based on the circumstances, but life is happening. Maybe grandchildren are now born, things like that, and life is happening, and they're still kind of somewhat longing for that relationship.
Yeah, I can also almost think of a particular scenario in which someone I had worked with no longer had a parent in their life, and they now felt better. Like they realized that that attachment was no longer healthy for them. And they felt better, and they were wrestling with the fact that life seemed a bit easier, that decision making seemed easier, that the guilt of am I gonna do this because this may not make them happy, this may not please them, that was no longer there. Like they didn't feel tethered to that person in the same way. They didn't have to let go and forget of all they were able to really let go of past memories and hurt to the point where they could just focus, on their small child and creating this life with the child that they wish they had years ago.
That's a nice segue into that, our next point of like feeling stuck, right? Because sometimes you get stuck in between the hope and acceptance. Sometimes you get stuck still wanting answers, but knowing that you're not going to get them. And so you're kind of just in limbo. But it sounds like in the client you just described, they figured out how to move forward, and then they started to feel the progress.
They liked it.
Yeah.
It felt right. It felt like a release of sorts.
And so, and I feel like that's common when you feel the ambiguous loss, you're not getting the closure, you feel the pain, and then you decide that the pain, the lack of closure, and this loss no longer gets to dictate your life. That's not always easy to do. It's not always easy to heal without closure, but it is possible. And in this case, a lot of that had to do with creating their own meaning, right? So creating, okay, this is what my life has been. This is what I've experienced. But what do I want out of it? Where do I have control? How can I get on the other side of this? Because this person, this situation, right, this experience is not giving me what I need to heal. So I have to create my own meaning, right? I had a client ask me one time, wasn't really, I won't say that they weren't fond of therapy, but they weren't fond of what they felt like were buzzwords. And one day I
mentioned, like those words that we hear.
Well, I mentioned one day that some healing needed to take place. And they were like, well, what, like, they didn't like that word.
I can understand that. I hear that too from time to time.
I think the healing indicated that there was some sort of brokenness that they weren't willing to accept. And there was. But I also think that for this particular person, I feel like it acknowledged a vulnerability that they also didn't want to admit. And so, in explaining healing and the importance of it, I'm like, everyone's definition is different, right? You can be impacted by the same scenario, but your healing is going to look different than the person who was also there, because it's about what you need to move through that experience and get to the other side of it so that you can function and operate in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so when there is no closure and there's still the existence of pain, sometimes we may not have all the symptoms, but we're still left with the pain.
Absolutely.
The pain lingers a little bit, right? So learning to manage through that, you might have to decide, what does healing look like for you? And you might have to break it down even in stages, right? Because healing today might look different than my healing in 3 months. Healing today might just be surviving the day.
Yeah, that's such a good point too. I'm reminded of another scenario. And also another population we don't talk about much is children in foster care.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, like so I'm reminded of a scenario with 2 siblings, boy and girl. They're adopted, and they're having 2 completely different experiences about the adoption. One's very happy, one's grieving. Now, the scenario that they left with their biological parents was the worst you could think of: abuse and, neglect. But the kid that's happy for the adoption says, no more. We don't have to experience that. We can be loved and we're safe. And the other kid's like, but what about our parents? They're not going to be safe. They're in that scenario. Like, we have to be with them. And so they're healing, the therapy that I did with both of them look quite different.
Yeah.
Look quite different. And they know their parents are alive and well. They know that
that's this. They're experiencing this ambiguous loss.
Yeah, they know where they lived. They know, but they also know that they can't go back, that this is the new normal, and there's an acceptance in this that,
I think about the one child that is going to have more of that pain associated with the longing, longing for what should have been, and not getting that, longing for the healthier version where we stay together.
And then also trying to reject the healthier version because it's not the biological connection that should have happened, even though the current adoptive, parent is doing the healthy, consistent nurturing that we need for development. You're not my mom. You're not my biological mom in that.
You're not giving me what I need. And the rejection is what I'm longing for. I don't want it from you. I want it from the person that was supposed to give it to me.
Right. The person that looks like me, the person that created me.
But they'll never get that. And that is something that is going to take time, but also attention. And the fact that you were able to work with those children in different ways, right? And really help them in those ways. Even just giving voice to the fact that this is normal. It's normal to want the actual person who gave you life to be the one that keeps you safe.
Absolutely. And it's funny too, like, I don't know if you've ever done this, but sometimes I think to myself, like, whoa, I probably would have done the same thing. If I knew what they knew, had their situation, like, whoa, I would have experienced it the same way. I would have made the same choices. And I guess that's where our empathy comes in, in the work that we do, where we see like, this is a human experience that I would have made the same choices had I been delivered the same experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another big part of healing through ambiguous loss is accepting the emotional complexity. So I find myself saying two things can be true at the same time. Right? And most of us, while we might be like, well, yeah, I don't think we really give enough attention to the fact that there could be multiple realities to our experience. We can experience the pain of a situation while also knowing that maybe it's the best thing for us. So going back to maybe like a relationship that you were maybe blindsided by the end of a relationship, right? You're going to feel the pain of whether you were ghosted or the person just decided to end the relationship. You're going to feel the pain of that loss, not getting closure. But there might be also another side of you that acknowledges the reality of how unhealthy the situation was to begin with.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? Or acknowledging that, okay, like even going back to your example with the children, they knew that it wasn't healthy. They knew that they needed to be in a safer environment, but they also knew and felt the love and connection for their parents, right? So we're dealing with these multifaceted emotions. We're dealing with these complex emotions. And sometimes we just have to accept that we can feel all the layers of emotion. But at the end of the day, we still have to go towards the healthier route of getting on the other side of that.
We have to. Yeah.
And that's not always easy to do, which is why people need to go to therapy. because understanding that all of these things, like what you're experiencing is absolutely true, right? And grief, again, being one of those invisible pains, right? If you're in physical pain, you get a little bit more sympathy. The emotional pain, you get a little less, right? And so with grief, sometimes it's just needing somebody to validate that what you are going through is hard.
And that there's not a time limit on your we keep using the word healing, on your healing, on your recovery, on your journey,
on the pain even, right? Like this idea that you should just get over it, like it's hard to get over not understanding why. Honey, I see people and I am immediately triggered to 20 years ago in college, and I just be like,
absolutely. Even like trivial things that happen, in your day to day, like you're at the supermarket and somebody bumped you, and it's like, why didn't you just say excuse me? Like why that could have been easily like, like we're always wrestling trying to understand why these experiences happen. And you may be bothered for a while, like she really bumped into me, and it's 3 hours later, you're in bed, like that lady really, always looking.
Oh my God, I had the horrible habit as a teenager of just rehearsing social interactions over and over and over again. And it's so unhealthy, right? But if there's no closure or understanding, and I am a why person, right? I need to understand what your intention was.
Same.
Like I need to know the why behind that. and I don't always get that, and it bothers me. But I understand now what that is and why that was so important to me even as a child. I didn't have the right tools though. I'm glad I know what I know now. It would have been really helpful to understand back then, which is why we're giving language to this loss, because somebody out there is asking the same question, why? And they may never get the answer to that why, but they can know that they can heal from and through the ambiguous loss.
Right. The why often doesn't matter. in the healing version. The why really doesn't always matter. It's
And
not. Go
that
ahead.
goes back to that complexity, right?
Mhm.
Because we feel like it matters,
Mhm.
but we don't need it to heal.
Right. Right. It's nice if you get it, but it's not necessary to heal, to grow.
Because the healing is your responsibility.
Mhm.
You know, the why goes back to them taking responsibility for their actions and
Yes.
providing closure. But as we know, with ambiguous loss, there's no closure.
Right.
It
Right.
would no longer be ambiguous loss, right? At that point, it's just,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And another way to kind of manage this is to address the boundaries that you have. Now, can you prevent this from ever happening again? Maybe not. We don't have that much control, but our boundaries, understanding our part when it comes to certain um, experiences, right? Whether it's in relationships or what have you, um, redefining our boundaries might be something that protects us, right? Not so much the cut off culture, right? No contact, but redefining maybe what and how you attach to people who may or may not be deserving of that attachment, right?
Absolutely. Our
Trusting
realistic
people.
expectations.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right. Setting realistic expectations for people and where you may be in your stage, right, of growing and connecting with that person.
Mhm. Yeah,
Sometimes we've been a little too deep.
absolutely. And not everyone deserves that level of exposure, of intentionality, of whatever, fill in the blank that someone else might have. And I think we
Mhm.
get better at deciphering who gets the most vulnerable. That's a better word to use. The most vulnerable um, version of us versus
Yes.
we just have lunch together and we can talk about movies and things like that.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, I really think that this is going to help a lot of people. I really appreciate you sharing your insight with me today, because some grief some people are experiencing grief because of the closure that never came, right? And it's so hard to heal when you've not received the answers to the questions that you have. But it is good to know that when we redirect our attention to the fact that this did happen, we may not get the answers that we need, but we do have the power to control how we move forward in life. I feel like getting back in the driver's seat, that makes all the difference, right? Realizing how much power you actually have. I
Mhm.
love when the light bulb goes off above a client's head when it's like, wait a minute, I have the power. And I'm
Right,
like,
right,
yes,
right.
you have the power. It's so exciting to see that dynamic shift in their thinking of like, wait a minute, this doesn't get to control me any longer. And
Mhm.
essentially, ambiguous loss, in ambiguous loss, you're being controlled by something that the other person is not willing to give, and that's closure. But you do have the power. So I'm going to leave you with some reflection questions, and I will add them to the chat. The
Mhm.
first question is, what unanswered question are you holding on to? And these reflection questions are meant for you to just really think, write it down, digest where you might need to start. And then if you need a little bit of extra help, you can go ahead and get the help you need. You have Embracing Oak Therapy, you have JLC Wellness Center, and plenty of other people where you can reach out for help. So, what unanswered questions are you holding on to? And what unanswered question or unresolved situation feels the heaviest for you right now? The third question is, how has uncertainty impacted your ability to move forward or find peace? And the last question is, what would it mean to gently accept not knowing without forcing a resolution. So accepting that you may not get that answer. What would that mean for you to accept that without forcing a resolution? This is the Self-Care Sound Mind podcast. Thanks for joining us on tonight's episode. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts about tonight's topic, ambiguous loss, the pain of no closure. Follow us at Kiera Moore Therapeutic Services. Again, for your therapeutic needs, you can go to embracingoak.com, or you can reach out to my friend Jordyn at, give them your website.
So
or how do you follow you?
Yeah, so I kind of just use Psychology Today. Can I
Okay, Psychology Today.
Psychology Today, Jordyn Chandler,
and you
Jordyn.
There we go. Find her on Psychology Today. And thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your night. And let's remember that you do have the power to heal through whatever type of loss you are experiencing, whatever grief you're experiencing, despite not always having